Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Kathy. Let's accompany each other to achieve our goals and go through what would be a difficult time together. In my fourth episode, I invited Jonathan Ross, who is the founder and the CEO of Agile in Asia, to talk about the electricity restriction that is recently happening in China, as well as energy crisis that is taking place worldwide. In this episode, you'll get to know the reasons behind and the current consequences to industries and supply chains, with additional snapshots of the global environment in energy crisis. Let's check it out. Hi, John. Thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me today, Kathy.
Yeah, sure. Do you mind to introduce yourself a little bit first?
Sure, yeah. I've been living in China for almost 18 years. My background is mostly in manufacturing and manufacturing management, mostly in the areas of manufacturing of CNC machining, high precision machining, injection molding, 3D printing, this kind of stuff. Eventually starting off as a supply chain manager, making my way into factory management, eventually becoming CEO of a large manufacturing company here in China. And then after leaving that company, I decided to start my own company, my own consultancy, where I essentially help companies that are looking to manufacture their products in China and broader Asia to develop their supply chain, to manage their new product development process, and of course manage quality. So with that, we're able to help customers accelerate their time to market much faster. And in addition to that, we also help companies with their, manufacturing companies here in China that are looking to improve their efficiency. So we'll go into a factory, we'll look at their processes and say, okay, how can we improve them? How can we shorten, cycle times and produce things faster so that they can make more money and also save their customers money.
Right.
So that's what I do. Yeah.
Yeah, that I'm kind of curious about how their business right now, because like right now in China there is a policy like electricity restrictions. It kind of affect a lot of factories right now. So how's your business right now?
Yeah, it certainly has. I feel like it's going to be, or it is a very temporary problem. I think it's been the confluence or combination of many things. The first thing is that has to do with the way the Chinese power plants, the way they purchase their energy, meaning how they purchase coal on the open market. In China, generally speaking, coal is purchased at not the market price, but at the government stated price. So the government says the price of coal is here. This is the price you buy, and this is the price you sell at, and that's your margin. So it's very, very much a controlled industry. And what happened was the imports that China was purchasing were higher than the local market selling price. So what happened was a lot of power generation facilities just literally stopped buying coal, because if they were to buy coal, they would have ended up losing money and running out of cash and essentially going out of business. So they just stopped. So that's one thing that happened that really created this crunch. And so the government reacted fairly quickly. It took them about a week or two to realize the severity of it. And what they did was they essentially told the power companies to raise electricity prices, particularly to the industrial sector, which accounts for most of the power consumption in China. Actually, residential use is very, very small as a proportion. So they just said raise the prices. And all they needed to do was raise the prices by about 8 to 10%. And that was able to give them the profit they needed, or the margin they needed, to be able to go to the open market and buy coal at the higher asking price. And for most most factories, the impact in terms of their cost is very, very small. So at the end of the day, I think the crisis is certainly averted, but it's not over yet, because the other problem they have is that the fact that their industrial electricity consumption year on year has gone up by about 18%. So that fast growth in electricity consumption is certainly leading to some strains on to the system that they have currently. And so this is forcing them to reopen plants, coal-fired power plants that were originally closed and shut down to make way for renewable energy, such as whether it be wind, solar, or even in certain cases nuclear energy, which is by far the biggest, you could say, green energy power source that that China's developing at the moment. So I think we're going to pass through this fairly quickly. I think this year's surge in consumption had mostly to do with companies that were essentially built up, that had a lot of built up demand. They didn't order anything last year. Now everyone's putting their orders in at once, and it just made the entire demand, the electricity demand, skyrocket. And so that's why I think we are where we are. I think we'll get through it. I think by the end of the month, things will go back to normal. And that's what I'm hearing all around the country, whether it be in the north or the south. Everyone's saying, yeah, we've got a generator. We're not using it now. Things are starting to get to normal. They get back to normal. They raise prices, but we're okay now. So it looks like the crisis was largely averted, thankfully.
Yeah, but how does it affect to the manufacturing field? Because for us, like as a lighting field, for our companies, it's kind of like, so for 2 days, like Monday and Wednesday, we only have like 15% electricity to be used. And for the other days, we have 100%. So how does it affect to manufacturing?
Yeah, well, I mean, 2 days a week, you should be happy that it's only 2 days a week, because some companies have it way worse than that. Some companies are shut down, 5 days a week, particularly the heavy industries in the Northeast. But yeah, I mean, a lot of companies are struggling to cope with that. Most companies bought a on-site generator burning diesel fuel at the rate of 150 liters an hour, which is crazy, but they need to have the power to make their products. It certainly has a major impact. I was just in a factory yesterday locally here in Zhongshan, where they make power switches and for circuit breakers, for electrical products for EVs and stuff like this. And their entire assembly line was shut down. It's a factory with 400 people, and the whole assembly line was completely shut down because of this power shortage. So yeah, it definitely creates a backlog. It's going to obviously create a delay in companies' ability to ship. It also has a big impact on profit because a lot of companies essentially in this situation, if they have with this much lost throughput, they have to pay all these costs. So I think a lot of companies are going to actually end up hurting from it. But again, I think it's only a temporary phenomenon. I don't think this is going to go beyond November, December. At the worst, it will be December. So I don't think this crisis will be going on for much longer.
Yeah, and like recently I read a lot of like notices on news that like globally, like the energy crisis is kind of happened everywhere after the in the period of the pandemic recovery. Like in Brazil, like the lack of the rains, and where is one of the main methods for there to generate electricity, right, from water, like in Brazil. And also in Europe, they also kind of like the prices in gas is also like increased like crazy. Yeah, how do you see? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. This is very, very interesting. Actually, in this case, when you're looking at the energy system globally, one of the things that has happened in the past few years, particularly the past 10 years, has been this big push into green and renewable energy, which is a great thing. It's fantastic, and it's necessary for the planet to reach net zero emissions in the next few decades, which is absolutely an absolutely essential move that the world has to make. Now, the problem is, as a result of all of that capital going into green and renewable energy investments, it ended up starving the petroleum base and the hydrocarbon industry. So what ended up happening was you have fewer oil rigs coming online. You got less exploration. You got less research and development in what is, in a sense, the most, energy in terms of fossil fuels is obviously oil, which is at the apex of the entire supply chain system. So oil is the basis from which everything is made. So it is the energy, it is the nexus raw material for everything. And we have underinvested in this area for quite some time. So this has become a very structural issue in terms of a supply, where demand growth continues, but supply is not growing as fast as demand, and so we have this structural problem. Now it goes beyond just underinvestment in oil exploration, um, and fossil fuel energy extraction, and it goes more also into you're pumping oil out of an oil field, for example. It takes about 9 to 10 months to get it running. Well, during the pandemic, not only did they see a crash in demand, right, globally for oil, as remember, if you remember last year, we had this huge oversupply of oil. There were actually, for the first time in history, negative futures on oil contracts. People were paying others to take the oil off their hands. It was a cost. It was becoming a burden, if you remember that last year. So you had this big glut of oil. And so what did the oil producers do? They shut down all the oil rigs, the excess oil rigs, because they had no choice. There was a glut of oil on the market, a collapse on demand. They couldn't get the workers in because of the virus. Everyone was at home. So we ended up with this contraction. Now, we didn't feel it in the price because, again, industrial output had collapsed for a short while. But the problem is, when you shut down an oil field or when you shut down any kind of energy extraction, it takes 10 months just to get it back online, if you can at all. So what we're experiencing is a delay, right? So now they're trying to get the oil capacity back up, but they've already fallen behind because they haven't explored enough. They're not opening enough rigs, and it takes months to get the old rigs that were already producing back to producing energy again. So here we are. And on top of that, a huge surge in oil demand. So this is a structural problem. Now, for the United States, I would argue that we are in an excellent position from energy. We are pretty much energy independent because during the Bush era, they invested a lot in what's called shale production, where essentially you drill horizontal holes and use high pressure water to make oil come out of rocks and essentially squeeze oil out of places that you couldn't imagine. And early on in that revolution, the cost of extracting shale from the ground was extremely expensive, extremely energy intensive. It was a loss-making approach. But over the past 10 years, that process has become so efficient that they're able to drill kilometers long bores to drill out and extract this shale oil. And now, actually, the cost of shale energy is now cheaper, or at least at parity, with what's called the light crude oil, which is the easy extractable crude that you find in the Middle East and et cetera. So the United States actually is in a very, very strong position for oil production. So I don't think that the United States is going to necessarily see any major problems when it comes to shortages of energy, but certainly Europe is going to see problems, and to an extent China as well, just because the lines of oil coming to China are very few. And the same thing goes for Europe, because they don't have a lot of oil within the country. So yeah, there's going to be disruptions, but if there are going to be energy disruptions and big impacts in terms of shortages, it's not going to happen in the United States. So, and the United States is a net exporter. So I don't see this problem being something that's going to go away in the short term. It's going to take a couple of years, and I think we're going to be sticking with much higher structural energy costs going forward.
So how do you think the recent of inflation on the global supply chains, and do you think it will go back to normal? Like when will it?
Yeah, I think with supply chains right now, there are so many, it's a confluence of problems that have happened here. But let's put shipping aside, because I think everybody knows that shipping is very much a temporary phenomenon, driven by imbalances in trade flows and the flows of ships going back and forth. But when you look at the real, some of the more core areas of inflation, for example, raw material, and again, picking up from where we were from talking about energy, all of this also translates into high material costs, because the more that energy costs, the more it costs to produce the raw materials. So that's the first thing. The second thing is raw materials in China, which, by the way, in terms of aluminum and steel, I believe China accounts for almost 80% of global production. So that's a lot, because the government heavily subsidized the industry for decades, and so they were able to build a tremendous market share, and of course overcapacity in these areas. And as a result, over the past 20 years, raw material prices, particularly of aluminum and steels, for example, have been artificially kept down because of what is, in a sense, overproduction within the China market, because China needed it to build their country together, to build the country and develop the market. However, this year, just recently, China has started to shut down a lot of steel capacity and aluminum smelting capacity as a result of the country's drive towards achieving net zero and reducing their overall emissions. So what this means is that for the longer term, irrespective of whether or not energy prices come down, raw material prices, assuming there is no collapse in demand, raw material prices are going to be high for quite some time to come. They're not going to go down anytime soon. And the same thing goes for plastics, because structurally there is simply less supply. So this has nothing to do with the money supply or lending money or recklessly or anything like that. This is literally supply side economics, a literal structural problem. So I think that we're going to see over the next 4 or 5 years, this inflation is going to continue before it turns deflationary. In other words, inflation will keep going until demand collapses. Once demand collapses, then the inflation will pretty much come to an end when we go into deflation.
Yeah.
So they will eventually come down, but they will never be what they were over the past 10 years. And it is unfortunate for people that are making products, but I think in the next couple of years, wages will catch up because people are starting to ask for raises, saying, look, cost of living is going up. And so we've got to go through this whole inflationary cycle, or what's known as stagflation, where we see reduced demand, stagnant incomes, and eventually as things work themselves out, things should return to normal. But it is having a huge impact. It's going to have a huge impact on product costs across many different areas.
Yeah, it actually impacts us a lot. Like for our products, we use aluminum and PC a lot, and also including like PC board and also like IC. Yeah, for this kind of like inflation on these raw materials, we had to do nothing but to increase the product prices. Guess that's happening widely in China. Is it only in China or also in other countries as well?
All around the world. Remember, China produces, a lot of the raw materials. Actually, you guys China exports a lot of raw material around the world. So yeah, it's definitely going to be a global issue. And as far as semiconductors are concerned, we're looking at least 2 more years down the line, 2 or 3 years, until the shortage really comes to an end. And I think it will come to a very abrupt end as the additional capacity comes online, because the U.S. government, the European government, countries all around the world that are into semiconductor production are getting involved. The government's coming in and making huge investment in building capacity for semiconductors. So I think we're going to see an eventual crash in prices of semiconductors from where they are today. But yeah, unfortunately, that's going to be here to stay for quite some time.
All right, then guess we still have a long way to go then.
We do. But I think people will keep buying. I think people will still continue to buy. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you, John, for joining me today, and thank you for sharing all the valuable opinions and thoughts. I really appreciate that.
Oh, you're very welcome, Kathy. Pleasure to be here. Thank you again for having me.
Yeah. Okay. So bye.
All right. See you later. Bye.
See you. Thank you for watching this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Click like and subscribe it if you would like to learn more about life advice from a successful businessman or a global view on a current news. Stay tuned. I'll see you guys in the next episode.